What is up, guys? It is your boy Jhota with Casual Panic, and I'm here to talk to you guys about Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity. Now, I know what you're thinking. Another Zelda game. Of course, Zelda is my jam. But I think there are a lot of things that we need to talk about when it comes to this new game before Breath of the Wild 2 comes out, hopefully next year. So recently, Nintendo dropped a demo for Age of Calamity, which lets us play through the first chapter. Now, in the beginning cinematic of this game, you see a small guardian, who I like to call Eggy, looks like a little egg, who is witnessing the events of the end of the war, when Link goes into the Shrine of Resurrection. Zelda saves him right before this, so as she's saving him and everyone else from Ganon, Eggy goes back in time. And he goes back in time to warn the heroes and the champions of the events to come if they fail this war. This kind of sets off something in my mind like, well, this kind of changes everything of what we thought about this game. You know, we kind of thought that we knew the events were going to happen the way they played out in Breath of the Wild, where, you know, the champions fight and fight till the very end, and eventually they die. And Link has to go into the Shrine of Resurrection for 100 years until he can be healed and then take on Ganon in Breath of the Wild. So what does this mean for the story of Age of Calamity, and maybe even the story of Breath of the Wild 2? Well, there's a couple different things that I think Nintendo's going to do with this. I think first and foremost, the story of Age of Calamity may differ from what we know from Breath of the Wild. It's entirely possible that with this new information, they will double their efforts, and they'll be able to stop Calamity Ganon and the forces from taking over the Divine Beast and killing the champions. On the other hand, it's entirely possible that they'll throw in some sort of twist into this game where, even though they know what's going to happen if they lose, and they try to even harder than they were before, it's entirely possible that, you know, Nintendo throws this little wrench into the works and says, well, actually, it didn't even matter. Ganon is just that strong that it doesn't even matter how hard they try, they're going to die anyway. I think either way, whichever direction Nintendo intends to take this game, you know, it's gonna change the way we thought about Breath of the Wild and how that story plays out. Now, this potential changing of events would really only matter if this is the exact same timeline as what happens with Breath of the Wild. Are these events going to change the future, or are they going to keep the future the same but potentially change the way that we see that story and how things transpired before Breath of the Wild? If the explanation is that all this is happening in a separate timeline, then I guess it really doesn't matter, because it's not going to change the events of the future. It's just kind of its own little game that we get to learn a little bit about what happened, but maybe not exactly what happens in Breath of the Wild storyline? Question mark? I don't know. But let's throw that separate timeline stuff out of the window, because that's a little bit less interesting to talk about, and let's go back to saying it is on the exact same timeline as Breath of the Wild. The events that happen in this Age of Calamity game are going to directly affect what happens in Breath of the Wild, and ultimately, Breath of the Wild 2, or whatever they call the sequel. If our new guardian buddy Eggy going back in time is what causes the future to change, that can mean that the events of Breath of the Wild 1 would never actually happen. And if that's the case, then Breath of the Wild 2 may be a completely different story and actually be a sequel to this new Age of Calamity game. It might be worth going back and reanalyzing the trailers that we have for this next Breath of the Wild game and kind of have it in sort of the light that Breath of the Wild never happened and we won the war. Nintendo has already confirmed that Age of Calamity is a canon story game. So the events that happen in this game are completely relevant to what's going on in Breath of the Wild and its sequel. Time travel's played a huge part in a lot of Zelda games. Ocarina of Time has time in the title. The events of that game were overridden when Zelda sends Link back in time to relive his childhood, which then gives us the events of Majora's Mask. And even in that game there's some time travel. So I think that via the precedent of older games, time travel actually affects the same timeline that it's a part of. So I think there's definitely some credibility to the idea that Age of Calamity could change what happens in Breath of the Wild 1 and spawn a different type of game than what we're expecting out of Breath of the Wild 2. It's also entirely possible that these are just the ramblings of an insane man who has no idea what's going on anymore and just wants to make sense of it. So, what I want you guys to do is let me know in the comments, what do you think is going to happen with Age of Calamity and then the subsequent games? Do you think that it's going to be a separate timeline and not affect anything at all? It's going to be a standalone game that gives us a little bit more story about what happened? Or do you think that it's going to change everything? Breath of the Wild 1 never happened, and, you know, this new Breath of the Wild 2 game, whatever they're going to call it, is going to be something completely different than what we expected. So yeah, let me know in the comments, guys. I know it's a little bit of a shorter video today, but man, I feel like I had to get that off my chest and just kind of rant about it for a little bit. So thank you for watching. If you aren't subscribed yet, please hit the subscribe button down below. We just hit 70 subscribers recently, so it's a huge achievement for us, and we thank you guys so much for doing that. I wanted to give a special shout out to my new friends Jack, Millie, and Sav from the UK, as well as Joe from the USA. You guys subscribed recently when I met you guys in Omegle, and I thought that was awesome, so it was really nice meeting you guys. Thanks for watching our videos, and I hope to see you guys in the next one.